Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Cabinet meeting. You're all very welcome. We also have in attendance, in addition to the Cabinet members, Councillors McLean and Councillor Southgate. They're also very welcome. We can now begin our Cabinet meeting. Are there any apologies for? Thank you for that. Are there any declarations of interest? I hear none. Thank you for that. We now turn to our minutes of our meeting held on the 13th of July 2020. Are there any dissenters to approving those minutes? There being none, those minutes are passed. We turn to item 4, the CPO resolution, Merton Estates Regeneration Programme, use of compulsory purchase powers at Ravensbury Estate Phase 2. This item has been withdrawn and it will be considered by the Cabinet on the 12th of October. We therefore turn to item 5, the procurement of the new Bishopsford Bridge. I turn to Cabinet Member Councillor Martin Welton. Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I formally move the recommendations as set out in this report. The recommendations here are to delegate authority to Director of Environment and Regeneration and Director of Corporate Services in consultation with myself in order to award the contract for the new Bishopsford Bridge. As Cabinet are aware, we resolved back in February 2020 to demolish the existing structure and to erect a new bridge. I can update Cabinet if that good progress has been made. That structure has been moved and the formal planning application was submitted recently and is going before the Planning Committee in October. We also as well in early August put out the invitation to tender, which will be coming back to the Council on 28th of September. The reason we are asking for delegation of authority is because we want to deliver this bridge as soon as possible. We recognise that it is key infrastructure in terms of the borough, and it's important that these things are expedited in order that work can get underway in week commencing the 9th of November with completion in the spring of next year. I'd like to take this opportunity, obviously thanking the officers for the work that has been done to date. I think as Cabinet are aware, it's quite a complex piece of work, but obviously it's a key project for us as a local authority, and it's important that things are done in an expedient and business-like manner. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you for your oversight over the new Bishopsford Bridge. I'm now turning to James McGinley, our officer who's worked very hard on this bridge. He and Paul McGarry have worked very hard. James, did you want to add anything?
Chair, with that introduction, I'd want to hand over to Tara Butler, who is the manager within the team on the day-to-day, who just wants to clarify a point on the total cost of the estimated total cost of the project.
Yes, of course. Tara, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Councillors, I'd just like to draw your attention to section 6 of the report, which refers to the February 2020 report and the budget that was in place for the total project, so all aspects of the project, which was given then at 2.69 million. Later in this agenda, councillors, you'll be asked to consider a report on the Neighbourhood Fund, which will reprofile the total budget for the project. I should emphasise that this is the total budget for all aspects of the project. And so it's really it's the Neighbourhood Fund budget that you might want to consider. But other than that, I'm happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you to James, to Paul, who's not with us, but Tara, I know you've been working on this Bishopsford Bridge, new Bishopsford Bridge. Any comments from Cabinet members? Okay, well, as a local councillor in Ravensbury Ward, I'm very excited about the progress on the new Bishopsford Bridge, and want to thank everyone for their hard work. So we're on item 5, the procurement of the new Bishopsford Bridge, to agree recommendation A, and that's to delegate authority to the Director of Environment and Regeneration, speeding up the process. Are there any dissenters to agreeing to recommendation A? I hear no dissenters. Therefore, I am going forward with the agreement of the Cabinet to recommendation A under item 5. Thank you all very much. We now move to item 6, the approval of the Neighbourhood Fund 2020 bidding round, and over to Councillor Martin Welton again. Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I formally move the recommendations in this report. This report recommends to Cabinet to allocate the Merton Neighbourhood Funds to specific projects as scheduled in Appendix A of this report. This follows a 7-week public consultation based on the criteria that we agreed as Cabinet on the Merton Neighbourhood Fund back in 2017, which is obviously in line with the community plan. And one of the key objectives of that was bridging the gap, especially between east and west of the borough. We received 33 projects in total, requesting a total of 1.7 million. Within this report, we recommend funding 1.4 million, which total 18 projects, and 2 top-ups of previously successful bids and allocation of resources. Since 2014, as a council, we have allocated, we have received from the Community Infrastructure Levy 4.7 million. To date, 2.5 million of this funding has been allocated. This funding is there to support the demands that infrastructure places, but also as well infrastructure within the borough. The assessment criteria for SIL is spending neighbourhood SIL would need to accord with the SIL regulations and government guidance on SIL, and that there are appropriate use of the funds consistent with government rules and Merton's community plans and business plan priorities. Schemes should not have any unacceptable revenue or capital implications on the council or other bodies. Estimated costs should be less than £20,000, though there is projects in there which come to a higher total. Capable of being started within the next year. Support from at least one ward member, and clearly demonstrate how they meet the neighbourhood criteria. You will see in this report the projects which we recommend for allocation. They include £30,000 for Growing Together planting on the London Road playing fields in Mitcham, £4,000 for Figs Marsh Park Run, £10,000 for Colliers Wood Rec, Building for Later Life, the Emwood Centre, which is based in Mitcham, allocating £65,000, Sustaining Dean City Farm, £36,616, Performance Space at Cricket Green School for Green Arts, allocating nearly £50,000. The Future Polka Theatre, I think we're aware that it has had challenges due to COVID. We've given it an additional 150,000. That's linked into terms of outreach work in the east of the borough. Uptown Youth Services, £30,000. Merton Digital Local Network, £35,000 for free digital mentoring. I think that is crucial in terms of bridging the gap. And Shopping Parade improvements for Brumcroat Lane, totaling 40,000. So this comes to nearly £750,000 in total projects. As Cabinet is aware, we also have the Wimbledon Stadium development. I'm delighted that stadium is opening next month, and that AFC Wimbledon are finally coming home. So there is some specific projects related to that, including £257,000 for the Haydens Road Parade improvement, the public realm at Hartfield Walk in Wimbledon Town Centre, and as I mentioned earlier, the Polka Theatre in Wimbledon. It's very important that these projects are there to improve Merton as a whole and in terms of the infrastructure. It's very helpful that we do have this money available. We know that the community infrastructure levy has played an important role in these financially challenging times. I am, as Cabinet Member, concerned about proposed government changes. I believe that these would have a retrograde step because it will affect our ability to deliver many of these very worthwhile projects. So I formally move the recommendations as set out in the report, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Welton, and thank you for that comprehensive report from you about what's happening with the Neighbourhood Fund. Over now to James McGinley, if he wants to add anything.
Thank you, Chair. Nothing further to add, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, James. Are there any Cabinet members wishing to speak on this item? Okay, thank you very much. There's also, in addition to Bridging the Gap, there's money for BAME Hub, which is supporting BAME organisations. And obviously, well, I know we're all pleased with the Hayden's Road monies around the brand new stadium. Thank you, Martin. Please thank all the officers, including James and all the councillors who've been involved. This is a good way of moving forward, bridging the gap and making sure that we help organisations that support organisations such as the Don's Local Action Group, for example. Okay, so we're on item 6, approval of the Neighbourhood Fund 2020 bidding round. We come to recommendations 1 and recommendation 2 to allocate the monies and to delegate authority. Are there any dissenters to those 2 recommendations, 1 and 2? There being no dissenters, the Cabinet therefore approves item 6 and recommendations 1 and 2. Thank you all very much. We turn to item 7, Merton's Public Space Protection Order Report, and over to Councillor Edith McCauley.
Thank you, Chair. The report seeks Cabinet support to introduce a more localized public space protection order following the expiry of the current one, which runs out on the 20th October this year. In 2013, the Council had a borough-wide controlled drinking zone, and in 2017, this order transitioned into a PSPO under the provisions of the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act 2014. The Act was introduced to address ASB and the impact it was having on individuals in our communities. On the 29th of June this year, a 6-week public consultation on the proposal was launched, and 87% of respondents agreed with the prohibition and 61% agreed with the geographical area proposed, which are as follows: Graveney, Fitzmarsh, Lavender Fields, Cricket Green, and Ravensbury wards. Under Section 59 of the Act, in order to make a PSPO, the local authority must be satisfied that on reasonable grounds, 2 conditions are met. The area would have had a detrimental effect on the quality of life of those in the locality. It also justifies the restrictions imposed by the order, and also to address an area-based issue and not to target individuals or communities. Right, in order to avoid a delay in implementing the proposed PSPO, it is recommended that following a decision of Cabinet, the Council goes out to a 6 weeks further consultation for areas of Modern Town Centre, Wimbledon Town Centre, and the wards of Abbey, Trinity, Pollard's Hill, and St. Helier, and collate further evidence, and following the results of the consultation, it should be reported to the Director of Environment and Regeneration, and also the head for community safety, obviously, which is myself, for us to consider. I would also like to mention that the report was taken to the Overview and Scrutiny Panel in July this year for their consideration, and they supported action being taken to address street drinking, and they proposed the PSPO to be extended to Morden and Wimbledon Town Centre. I must also point out that when considering the proposals, members of the Cabinet must consider the Council's public sector equality duty under Section 149 of the Equality Act 2010. This is why we have been working with John and Everett over the last few weeks to ensure that we meet these deadlines. I must also mention to Cabinet that under Section 66 of the Act, any challenge to the validity of the PSPO must be made to the High Court by an interested person within 6 weeks of it being made. So therefore, this means that if it has to be done via a judicial review. In these circumstances, I therefore formally recommend the recommendations A to G, which are in the documents for Cabinet tonight to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edith McCauley, and thank you for your excellent relationship with our police here in Merton, and not only with the preceding borough commander, but with the current borough commander, and the way in which you engage with the court system and with these issues for the safety of our residents. Can I turn to Kiran Vagaral to see if she has anything to add, and/or Kath James?
It's Kieran here, nothing to add, Chair.
Thank you very much, Kieran, and thank you for the work that you do. I know you're in the background. I know that you work hard with Councillor Edith McCauley, and I know that you really have stepped up to the mark since you've taken over. Thank you for all your hard work. Any other Cabinet members wishing to speak on this item? Okay, we're on item 7, Merton's Public Space Protection Order Report. We have recommendations A to G. Recommendation G refers to the further consultation on Morden Town Centre, Wimbledon Town Centre, the wards of Abbey, Trinity, Pollard's Hill and St Helier. So those are the recommendations. Are there any dissenters to recommendations A to G being agreed by this Cabinet tonight? There are no dissenters, and therefore this Cabinet approves item 7, Merton's Public Space Protection Order Report, and the recommendations that go with that, and those are recommendations A to G. Thank you very much to you all. We now turn to item 8, COVID-19 Local Outbreak Control Plans and Processes. Just a short note from myself, and that is that the government has passed a series of statutory instruments, one of which is on this item, the Health Protection Coronavirus Restrictions Regulations. And the local authorities have regulations to look into, and the local authority Merton has published its outbreak control plan. So Appendix A has the government's regulations, Appendix B has the local authorities outbreak control plan, and we're here to make sure that for the avoidance of doubt, we are delegating decision making with regard to local outbreaks to the Chief Executive. So it is a legal matter. So if I can turn to Louise Round to see if she wants to add anything and explain things to us, and/or Jed Curran.
Hello, councillors. It's Louise Round here. I think you've introduced the report, Leader, perfectly adequately. I don't think there's anything to add. Just to make it clear, this is not the kind of lockdown that we have read about in the news as is being imposed in the north of the country. It's about individual premises or individual events being closed should we believe there's a risk to the health and well-being of our residents.
Thank you very much. Jed, did you want to add anything?
Nothing to add, Stephen. You've comprehensively explained the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other Cabinet members wishing to speak on this item? Okay, thank you all very much. So in item 8, COVID-19 local outbreak control plans and processes, we're simply handing delegation to the Chief Executive, like all other authorities, with regard to dealing with local outbreaks in certain areas by certain people. And this is purely for the avoidance of doubt. So it's recommendations A and B. Are there any dissenters to recommendations A and B on item 8? I hear no dissenters, therefore this Cabinet approves item 8, COVID-19 local outbreak control plans and processes, and recommendations A and B therein present. Thank you all very much. We move to item 9, a proposal of extension of the agency worker contract. Councillor Mark Allison.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. This is an item that's been brought forward in order to extend the agency worker contract for an additional year because of business-like approach that we're taking. I'd like to start by thanking the staff and officers who've been working on this paper and who've been delivering the service for us over the last 3 years of the contract. We're looking to extend the contract for a further year. This is because the extension will provide the best value for the council in our view. We reckon that we can see from the various graphs in the report the way that the provider have operated and helped us to reduce the cost and reliance on agency workers over time. We know that's been a concern of people. And you'll notice in the report it does talk about the possibility that the further savings can only be achieved by either reducing the number of agency workers being hired or reducing their rates. But the extension that we're providing will enable some cost avoidance for the council compared to procuring a new contract. So on that basis, I recommend the report goes for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mark Allison. I'll now hand over to Caroline Holland to see if she'd like to add anything to this 1-year extension.
Thank you, Leader. I'd just like to add the current provider has also been very successful in enabling us to move other staff off our other interim contracts onto this one. So we've achieved better value for money and greater contribution and sourcing of agency staff. We will unfortunately always need agency staff and interim, so that is something I know the Standards and GP Committee do take a lot of interest in, and making sure that we are monitoring them and managing them effectively, and we will continue to do so whilst we extend this contract. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you for your work and your team's work on this item with Councillor Allison. Are there any other Cabinet members wishing to speak on this item? Okay, we're on item 9. That's the proposed extension of the agency worker contract. It's a 1-year extension. It's recommendation A. Are there any dissenters to that recommendation A? Okay, there being no dissenters. Item 9, proposed extension of the agency worker contract, recommendation A, is approved by this Cabinet tonight. Thank you all very much. We now move to item 10. That's the 2019-20 Treasury Management Annual Review and approval to change in investment limits. I hand over to Councillor Mark Allison.
Thank you again, Leader. And once again, I'd like to stress my thanks to all of the officers and staff of the council who have worked so hard on this subject matter. Treasury management probably doesn't excite many people around the country, but it plays a very key role in the business-like approach of the council. And so I would like to thank them for their efforts to provide good value for the council. It's much appreciated. The report does speak for itself, but I would like to just draw attention to the recommendation that we approve the updated and increased money market fund limits due to the current low interest rate environment that we've got and the need for cash, it will enable the council to hold more funds and in the meantime earn interest income. And that will obviously help the council with its financial position in a marginal way at the moment, given the other much bigger concerns that we've got about council funding, which we're going to come on to later. But it's a really terrific example of a good team working hard to provide good value for the council and for our residents. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Councillor Allison. I now pass over to Caroline Holland for her contribution on this item.
Thank you, Leader. I suppose just to draw your attention that this report will go on to Council. I think it's the first time since I've been the Section 151 officer, we've actually amended our Treasury management strategy during the course of the year. So that just shows you some of the unprecedented times that we are in. So whilst we may have cash at the moment, we will still have some significant budget gaps going forward, but we want to maximise as much as possible the return on those monies, and therefore establishing a separate and additional money market fund will assist us. And you'll see in the business plan report that Councillor Allison referred to in his introduction, the amount of interest we are assuming to generate from our income, and it's not very much, and certainly less than the current year. So we're trying to maximise the return as much as possible to reduce the impact on other frontline services. So I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other Cabinet members wishing to speak on this item? Thank you all very much. This is item 10, Treasury Management Annual Review and Approval to Change in Investment Limits, recommendations A and B. Are there any dissenters to those two recommendations? Thank you. There being no dissenters, this Cabinet approves item 10 and the recommendations therein, recommendations A and B. Thank you all very, very much. We now move to our last three items, and obviously these may be linked, but I'll leave that to Councillor Mark Allison to inform us. So it's item 11, Draft Business Plan 2021-2025, and then items 12 and 13, a Financial Monitoring Report 2021 June, and Financial Monitoring Report 2021 July. Over to Councillor Mark Allison.
Yeah, thank you again, Leader, and maybe a bit of a broken record, but I'd really like to thank all the officers and staff who have been so key to producing these reports. I really do appreciate the work that they've put into it. And given the content of the report, I think it's also worth putting on record my thanks to the very many members of staff of the council across the last 6 months or so. The COVID pandemic has been an extraordinary test of the council's resilience and the abilities of our staff, and I really think that they've stood up to that test amazingly well, and I hope that that we can all agree to thank them. However, I would like to use this opportunity really of the presentation of the business plan to issue the government and our residents a very stark warning about the future of the council and its services. Unless the government fully funds the council for the cost of all the frontline services that we provided throughout the pandemic, there are going to be very significant cuts to local services in Merton. And we need to use this opportunity to explain the extent of that and how difficult it's going to be for the council and for our residents. The figures in the business plan that are backed up by the business-like papers that we've produced for the financial monitoring reports are very troubling. We estimate that the cost to the council of the pandemic has been £26 million greater than the amount of money that the government is giving to the council. And just to put that into context, the council receives only around £99 million in council tax each year. So that £26 million shortfall represents more than a quarter of all the money that we receive from council tax. Through the course of this year, the financial monitoring reports show that that we have been taking action to reduce the spending, the expenditure of the council, and have been able to reduce the costs by around about, we expect, around £3 million by the beginning of next year. But that means that the deficit for the course of this year, as outlined in the second of the financial monitoring reports, is just shy of £23 million, and we will have to find that money from somewhere, unless the government reimburses the council for the full cost of the pandemic. And the business plan papers set out how we will try and deal with that in future budgets. But unfortunately, I do have to warn everybody that what the business plan is talking about now is unprecedented cuts in the future if the government does not provide the funding. These future savings in the next year are 5 times greater than we had anticipated before the pandemic. And I think that these are probably the biggest next year gaps in our funding that we have ever had as a council. So despite all the business-like measures that the council has put in place, including reducing our spending in year and the efficiencies that we've already brought into place, there remains this £23 million shortfall for this financial year. And so I have to warn our residents that there may be cuts to the council on a very large scale. And in fact, those cuts could increase if in future years unemployment increases. We know that the furlough scheme is coming to an end. And if that means that residents are no longer able to pay their council tax, or if it means that the companies that are no longer going to be supported by the government's struggle, and they find that they're unable to pay their business rates. So although there could be more money from the government, that hasn't been announced yet, and so we are now looking at very, very significant savings. So we are trying to make, what I would like to say is we are trying to take a business-like approach to our finances, but residents should know that we face an unprecedented budget gap, which will put all council services at risk of cuts if the government does not cover the full cost of the pandemic. We are very disappointed that after our staff have worked so hard to protect residents and provide essential services, even though this has put them at increased risk of contracting COVID-19, the government has only covered a fraction of the extra costs. The council has spent years ensuring Merton is a great place for families, and our top priority remains to protect residents, control the outbreak, and save lives. But if the government do not protect our finances, we will not be able to protect services. Our staff have risked everything to stop the virus and are doing all they can as we go into winter and face a possible second wave. Now that we have reached the point when budgets need to be calculated, we need the government to do the right thing and protect Merton's services. I'm sorry to leave it on that tone, but I do appreciate the support of everybody in the council, all the staff and officers for all that they've done over the last few months. And I hope that Cabinet can use this opportunity to pass on their thanks to our staff as well, and to send a very strong message to the government that we face a really extreme shortfall in the coming years, and there will be consequences to council services if the government do not provide full reimbursement for councils. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for your work and your assessment of the situation as at present, unless the government moves in and does what it said it would do, and that is urge local authorities to do all they can to safeguard residents. And now they change their tune, I understand, to you should have only done what was required of you. But we will, as a cabinet, we will as individual councillors, I will as a leader talking to other leaders throughout London and throughout the country, lobby, urge, talk to, and persuade government to adequately recognise the work of local authorities in safeguarding their residents up and down the country. I'd like now to hand over to Caroline Holland for her view on these three papers, and then I'll open it up to the Cabinet. Caroline.
Thank you, Leader. I suppose normally we go into our budget planning to say we know most of the assumptions around which we're working towards, and we have a more realistic size of what our budget gap's going to be. This year, as we started the process, there are just so many unknowns. So we actually did a sensitivity analysis, which is set out on page 23 of the supplementary agenda. Depending on which scenarios come to fruition. And normally I would encourage you to plan for the worst and hope for the best. But I think looking at savings of £33 million next year, it just cannot come to pass. So we are anticipating that there will be some movement against that. So that's why we are currently setting savings targets based on that even level bounce back recovery. And that's what we're saying at the moment. This budget gap is very much linked to the recovery of the economy, the recovery and how successful we are in dealing with second waves and any further complications or issues that may arise from local lockdown plans if they are needed. We have over 30,000 residents who have been furloughed. So that furlough scheme is coming to an end. So we do not know how many of those residents are likely to still have a job at the end of that scheme. So therefore there could be sort of impacts on our council tax support scheme, on just the local economy, on our local businesses, which could then have an impact on our council tax and business rates. I would point out we are still awaiting the calculation of an income grant, which may reduce that cost to us in the current year of the cost, but we are working through what that is. But it's still 75% of 95% of our budgeted income shortfall, and only for certain amounts and levels of income. So any rental income that we have from our industrial estate, which we will have inherited when Merton was created, we will not be allowed to recover any loss of income from those. So there will be some shortfall still going forward. And also it does depend on how swiftly the economy gets going for the amount and levels of income, and also starting up services around, in particular, our bailiff scheme linked to the courts opening and being able to do the paperwork required to enable sufficient debt recovery. You'll see as part of the month 3 report in Q1, there is not the normal debt report that we do, but just to show you the scale of some of the measures we've put in place to assist residents and businesses. So our debt has increased from 14 million to 18 million during this first 3 months, and we'll be working to see how we can still help residents and businesses going forward, but that does then have a further knock-on effect on our budgets. We are still waiting for an announcement around the spending review, when we will get the details of that, and indeed there's been some talk of the spending review being deferred. So what does that mean for the monies that we need to enable us to make appropriate decisions at the right time? So we have been working with government departments to make sure that we get this information as early as possible, so you do not take decisions which are not necessary, because there will be some significant impacts of the gaps that we currently have. The month 3 report will be going on to the Financial Monitoring Task Group next week. So there will be sort of further analysis and investigation of some of the numbers and what it does mean for us going forward. And we are constantly reviewing the assumptions within here. So we have said on the recommendations, the current targets that we have set out for the departments to try and meet that budget gap, which is set out on page 27 of the supplementary agenda. If some of the assumptions come in more positive, then we will look to amend those targets based on the ratios that we have set out. And hopefully we have taken a realistic view and it won't get significantly worse. You'll have seen within the monitoring reports, because we go through and normally update all the assumptions around pay, inflation, investment income, the pay award has been agreed at 2.75%. So that does actually cost us more than we allowed for in this financial year. But going forward, we think as a way of maintaining the overall costs, that those pay awards are unlikely to be as generous as this year's one has been. Although some staff will say we've been years catching up, therefore it's not necessarily generous. So, but we've reduced the assumptions there to 1.5%. So again, some of the assumptions, if they do not come to pass, will have additional costs for us. At this moment in time, we've assumed 2% council tax increases. We are asking government to let us know as soon as possible what the council tax referendum limit will be, if there will be a referendum limit, and also if there's any talk of a preset for either adult social care or social care generally. That shouldn't necessarily be linked to the spending review, but it may be tied up with our overall Treasury strategy. So we're just waiting to see if those sorts of decisions could help us, and then also the impact that may have on some of the poorer working population who are just managing to take by. Sort of in council tax levels goes up, then of course there will be an increase on the council tax support scheme, which will be coming back to you for November council for you to approve. So we were looking at how we described the 3 scenarios that we had, and we decided woeful was probably not really appropriate to put into the papers, but in some ways the worst case scenario, I think, could be described as that verbally, and just certainly met with stunned silence when we presented that to the management team, because of the energy that's gone into working and coping with COVID and the good work that's been done to support our residents and businesses, and the energy that's taken to then see the level of savings still required to maintain a steady state almost, because if there is a second wave coming, if we have the national flu situation, or indeed there's been no mention yet, so I will mention any impact of a no-deal Brexit, some of that could have further unintended consequences on our budget gaps going forward. But happy to take questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, and please pass on my thanks to your team and to yourself. Thank you very much for all you do for us. I know you have a great team working for you, and you've encapsulated it by saying the energy that people have put in into protecting our residents from COVID, and now they're looking at what more they need to do to get back to, if it is back to normal, the kind of cuts that they may have to, through our systems, may have to undertake. And therefore that's why our energy as councillors will be to persuade the government to keep to its commitment to fund and to adequately cover the costs of the protection of the monies that's gone into protecting residents, not just in this borough but throughout the country. Okay, so now over to Cabinet members, should they wish to make a contribution on this item of the finances of the council and what we need to do to persuade government to adequately fund local authorities for the costs of COVID. Are there any Cabinet contributions? Well, we do have a good team. We have Councillor Mark Allison driving this item. I know that you'll all each look at your portfolio and the work you're doing, but I know you're all sanguine about the kind of issues that you have to deal with. And it behoves the trust we have in both the finance lead, the deputy leader, and Caroline and her team, that we sadly accept these 3 reports. The information they're giving us is of a gap of 23 million. If the government does not come into play and do the right thing by local authorities, and we will be pushing for that, but also working hard to make sure that we do what we have to do, sadly, to ensure we have a balanced budget. But hopefully, through pressure from councillors, from this cabinet, and from London councils and leaders throughout the country, the government will see a sense and do the right thing by local authorities. So we're drawing to a conclusion on this cabinet meeting, but we need to go step by step on these 3 papers and agree the recommendations, even though we've taken them together. So on item 11, draft business plan 2021-2025, we have recommendations 1 to 6. Are there any dissenters to those recommendations? Tough recommendations. There being no dissenters, this cabinet approves draft business plan 2021-2025 and recommendations 1 to 6 thereto attached. We then move on to item 12, financial monitoring report 2021, June 2020, recommendations A to C, and there may be more impact from COVID. They're not apparent at this stage. Let's be mindful of that. Are there any dissenters to recommendations A to C attached to item 12? I see and hear no dissenters. This cabinet therefore approves item 12, financial monitoring report, June 2020, recommendations A to C. And on our final item, item 13, financial monitoring report 2020-21, July 2020 month of, we have recommendations A to C there too. Are there any dissenters? There being no dissenters, this cabinet approves item 13, the financial monitoring report 2021, July 2020. Tough, but recommendations are there for us to be businesslike. This cabinet therefore agrees those recommendations. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to Councillor McLean and Councillor Southgate. Thank you to everyone who's popped in to this cabinet meeting. I draw this cabinet meeting to a close. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.